from the heart of Dubai, where tomorrow is being built today, to the world. Welcome to the CTO Show with Mehmet. Here, we redefine technology and reimagine possibilities. With Mehmet, delve into the riveting realms of AI, cybersecurity, and digital technology. Experience the thrilling highs and lows of startups. Immerse yourself in the spirit of entrepreneurship and witness the future of business innovation being written in real time. Now, without further ado, let's tune in and explore the future.
Hello and welcome back to a new episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today, I'm very pleased to have with me Alex Schlager. He's founder of AIceberg, a company which is in the intersection of AI and cybersecurity. Probably, maybe from the name, you guessed it. I'm saying this to the folks who listen to us or are watching us. Alex, the way I love to do it, I don't, steal the spotlights from my guests. I keep it to them. Tell us a little more about you, your background, your journey, and what you're currently up to, and what exactly AI Asperg is all about, and then we can deep dive from there.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me, Mehmet. Alex Schlager. I'm the founder and CEO of AIceberg. And we do detection and response for AI-powered workflows. A workflow could be as simple as a LLM-powered chatbot or as complex as a multi-step, multi-hierarchical agentic workflow. Our mission is to provide safety and security for enterprises adopting AI. The special sauce, if you like, is we do not use large language models. We rely solely on explainable machine learning models. We are very adamant about never to monitor a black box with another black box.
Cool, and thank you again, Alex, for being here with me today. Now, of course, what I like to do always, I like to do my homework, getting prepared as much as I can, of course. And I know, like, the main reason why you founded AI Iceberg, because you saw AI becoming a news attack surface, like, long before people noticed. So I like to go into the problem first before talking about the solution. So what are the shortcomings you saw in the traditional, and they are traditional legacy probably now, the cybersecurity tools, like, that you know let you feel that this is not enough for this AI era?
Well, to be honest, we started this as a research project on AI explainability.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a bit of a tangent to cybersecurity, if you like, at the time. And the idea was to really try to reverse engineer deep learning, deep learning based models, so-called black boxes that are intransparent or incomprehensive to the human user. And with the rise of large language models, let's call them, deep learning on steroids, we saw that this problem, this issue, this challenge is even, becoming more severe. So it started as a research on explainability, and it ultimately ended up in, to my earlier point, in providing guardrails, safeguards on the basis of explainable AI. So to use one type of AI, which is transparent and accessible to humans, to safeguard and protect humans from black boxes. Now, the irony is we actually do both, right? We protect the user from the AI and the AI from the user, depending on the scenario and the context.
Every person experienced in this domain, like yourself, Alex, that currently they are telling me it's like of course, it was always a chicken and egg problem. The companies who works in this domain, they try to think before the hackers what they can do, but now with AI, like, it became accelerated on both sides. Now, um in today's companies, where do you see the biggest blind spots when it comes? You talk about, like, guardrails. Where are, like, the blind spots when it comes to AI system vulnerabilities?
I think it starts with shadow AI. The enthusiasm and the push on AI adoption is so strong that you have AI popping up all over organizations, right? Whether it's marketing using Gen AI for image generation, legal departments to using GenAI for summarization or content creation, and the CISOs being challenged by losing a little bit control, at least temporary, in sense of where AI is being used, which data is being shared, and what the enterprise's exposure is to public Gen AI services in particular. So this is where we see it starting, and it got, I wouldn't say worse, but the challenge got bigger with agentic AI, where now it's not only using public services, like the image creation use case, but actually business entities starting to build agents for the simple reason that you don't need IT necessarily or coders anymore to set up agentic workflows. So the visibility is really the first challenge that we hear from CISOs, as adoption really is moving literally through every business function and unit.
Do you see, Alex, also this challenge where people they think that they assume that AI models are safe because themselves they are sitting maybe in their offices, or maybe someone is used even if they are working from home, but hey, like we have the VPNs and we have these firewalls and all these internal tools. So do you see this misconception with the companies that at least you have talked to so far?
No, actually not. Well, the issue obviously is, or the risk is within the transaction or interaction itself. So to your point, if the infrastructure part is secure, there is still the risk of of the model being poisoned, the data being used being poisoned, a website that the model goes to scrape or content or to fetch content being poisoned. So there's still a lot of attack vectors and risks remaining, let alone the safety aspect. So the interesting part or discussions we have with CISOs is now that they should care about safety as well as security, because at the onset of an incident, you don't really know if it's a safety issue, a model error, or downstream propagated error, or the result of an adversary. And so all of a sudden, we have safety conversations with CISOs that they not necessarily saw coming in that context.
Right. Now, this is kind of I would believe some non-technical CEOs or non-technical leaders um, think about like what can go wrong. Like again, like what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to simplify the this attack surface as much as it can be. So if we want to kind of tell them this in a way that we can resemble it to something else, like what it would be like, if we want to kind of compare it to a physical world, like how we
Right.
can compare that.
Well, think of it this way. Let's say you're an enterprise operating a public-facing chatbot that has been set up using a large language model for customer service oriented tasks. Um, the bot or the large language model could hallucinate and produce a response to your customer, to your consumer, that is factually incorrect, and the consumer might realize that, right? So there's a certain degree of reputational damage or reputational aspect in there, but it's not the end of the world, right? The next level could be that the model has been manipulated, or to a certain degree that it gives, let's say, vulgar or insulting answers to your customer. So I
Right.
talked to a CISO who literally said, look, our chatbot swearing at our customer is not great, but it's not the end of the world from a security perspective. So in the chatbot realm, or we have a media customer who will release a chatbot for children next year, right? So there you go into areas of unwanted speech, of toxic speech, of illegal speech that simply needs to be detected and avoided. You can imagine the fallout for this company if parents, for example, would feel uneasy having their kids using the chatbot or visiting that website. So that's really on the chatbot side. And
Mhm.
to your point, the blast radius is relatively contained there. As we move forward, once RAG, retrieval augmented generation, meaning active data retrieval from sources is involved, it gets a bit more tricky in sense of, sensitive data disclosure, whether it's PII, PCI, PHI, or company confidential information, right? The whole topic of identity and access management and privilege is really not fully solved yet in sense of which information under which context by which user should be retrievable, for example. As we move into agentic, this is where the risk surface really widens and broadens because we move legacy processes, into autonomous states with agents. And there they access tools, they access data, they execute on tools, they go to external sources. So this is where the attack and risk surface significantly expands. And to my earlier point on privilege, this is one of the challenges. You have an agent that has certain privilege of accessing data.
Right.
But now we also need to think about on whose behalf the agent is accessing data. So Mehmet runs the agent and Alex runs the agent. Both of us have different privilege settings, right? Mehmet is allowed to see, all the confidential and sensitive information. I am not. But we need mechanisms so that the agent understands on whose behalf it is acting. So it's not only the agent's privilege of access, it's on whose behalf the agent is performing that, for example.
Great. And I think all what we're discussing, Alex, falls under, what we call governance, risk, compliance, GRC, Um, so now I would like to understand how you come and help, customers in making sure that all what we discussed so far doesn't happen. Like it
Right.
doesn't go curse the customers, it doesn't access sensitive data and then leak it somehow. So if you can explain to us how do you do that on a high level?
So we use what's called semantic classification. We classify language, we classify code to determine the information being disclosed in an input or output and the content being disclosed. So to your point, whether we find, private information, health information, payment information, we can detect that and redact that. So we don't necessarily need to block the entire input or output, but we can redact this kind of information on the fly. On the content side, for example, we look for toxic speech, hate speech, racism, sexism, etc., in order to block such inputs or outputs. The same, holds true for illegality, for example. Moving beyond that, we classify the user intention, right? So often chatbots by design have a specific scope that ideally should not be for example, we have a banking client that wants to avoid people asking medical questions to a bot, right? Because
Right.
liability and simply of this being out of scope for the purpose of the chatbot. So by detecting the user intention, you can enforce policy and for example provide an automatic response. Dear user, we're sorry, this is not a medical support bot. We are here to provide financial advice or support for your account, whatever it is. As you move into agentic, things become a little bit more complex because we need to look at the relationship between what a user is asking for and what the agents are doing. So think of it this way. It's an example I use. It's not very realistic, but it's easy to follow. I ask an agent to book a ticket to Los Angeles for next week, and I see in the agentic interactions that the agent wants to call GitHub. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't align. There's no alignment between what the user intention is and what the agents are actually executing. And that applies to safety and security, right? So you could, to my earlier point, there could be a safety issue because the agent is simply, mistaken based on the LLM instructions, or it could be an adversary involved in that agentic chain.
Would be because when we talk about agents and we talk about different systems talking to each others, is it like the same, I would say, guardrails that are applied, for example, to the LLMs, applied somehow to what these LLMs might be talking to. So to your point now, because you just mentioned the GitHub, and so
Right.
securing the APIs or access to the APIs, or maybe maybe they have some SaaS products that, and nowadays we are seeing this a lot, Alex. Um, a lot of these LLM, companies, or like companies behind the LLMs, if I want to put it in the right way. So they are also kind of, establishing these partnerships with like different providers, right? And if we talk about the B2B space, of course, which usually I focus more on, so we find, like, let's say, access to your OneDrive or Google Drive, and so and they do this within the application. So how here you can also help, when it comes to safeguarding the whole thing, instead just, the LLM. How this is different from just
It,
securing the LLM. Yeah.
well, there's multiple use cases. So we differentiate normally three use cases. The first use case is CISOs who want to, have observability of how AI is being used in their organization, right? Back to the shadow AI we talked briefly about,
Hmm.
and control over data exposure. And in this case, we are integrated with the firewall, for example, right? We act as
Hmm.
a forward proxy. We support the ICAP protocol, and specific traffic that is AI bound is inspected by us. So it's invisible to the end user, and the CISO gets the full observability and control over, what public services are being used for, which services are being used, and the ability to control data exposure, data loss protection, if you like. The second use case is companies that run their own LLM powered application. Let's take a
Hmm.
chatbot, right? There we act, like a proxy or a firewall, if you like, where the application calls us, we call the model. The model gives us the reply, we return the reply to the application, right? So we basically sit in line of the traffic between application and, let's say, a large language model. And then the third use case and final use case is agentic AI. All agentic frameworks today have so-called hooks and callback functions.
Right.
So we ship an SDK, customers drop it into their config file. And what now happens is that the framework, Llama Index, Hugging Face, AWS Strands, it doesn't matter which of the frameworks, will send a copy of each event to us. Let's say, the user activating the agent talking to a large language model, the agent executing a tool. So for all of these events, before and after the event, we get a copy and we tell the framework whether it's allowed to move to the next step or not. So we don't sit in line, but we kind of listen in and we tell the framework, this looks good, you're allowed to move to the next step, right? Or if we find a safety or security issue, then we would instruct the framework to basically terminate the agentic flow.
Cool. Now, I'm gonna ask you a question not related to what you do really here, Alex, but I would like to hear your thoughts about this topic. Now, as I was giving you the example a few minutes ago about someone, maybe in the office or outside of the office, because people work hybrid or
Mhm.
completely remote sometimes. Um, I started to hear about some incidents which are like kind of, and I know again, it's not your area what you do, but as I was mentioning, it's good to hear your thoughts. Where us as people who are working for these companies are going outside and feeding these LLMs, the public LLMs, with kind of private data, right? So, like, there's nothing that stops me today from, and I'm talking about a private company, not public company. So maybe I would go and take, um, an Excel file containing maybe some financial information about the company, and I give it to ChatGPT, Claude, whatever, Gemini, and I start to do this. Now, when companies want also to harden these things, what's the best practice here? Especially like it's like the Wild West, as they say, right? So you can you can control people sitting maybe in your perimeters, but when they are just outside, what have you seen working at least to decrease the amount of data leakage that can happen, or any other consequences that can occur?
I mean, I think that's one of the biggest challenges you're bringing up, Mehmet, because we have a client, I should rather say, where in the early days, they simply blocked any access to a large language model. So
Mm-hmm.
what employees started doing, they basically copy pasted corporate information into their private email, send it to their private account, then use the large language model, and then send the response back to their corporate email account, right? So to your point, there is no 100% protection to a certain degree. We have one client who are basically now applying scanning and DLP to all their emails as well, which many companies do, to check for that use case, right? But in general, the short answer is data loss protection, right? The ability to detect whether sensitive information is being shared. The challenge is many companies do not want to invest into the effort of, sorting and organizing the data, labeling it, indexing it, whatever the DLP solution calls for. It can be labor intensive, right? So we are working on a solution that's off the shelf that gives you a general indication of sensitivity. But of course, it is not as precise and user specific as if you would start, labeling your own data. The other thing which we experimented on, which I still like as an idea, and we might actually end up doing it, is the reverse. Let's say you have a highly sensitive document and you want to understand whether the large language model has ever seen that content.
Mm.
So you can create questions out of this document without disclosing its information and basically ask the model. And based on the response you get, you can gauge, has this model ever seen this information or not? So it's not so much the prevention, but kind of the test and validation that a particular document or information has not been disclosed or leaked to a large language model yet.
Right. Yeah, and and the reason I ask you this because you highlighted shadow IT multiple times, and I think I started my career, in the IT department, and we were always like complaining to our managers about like people using shadow IT, and I can bet today that people doing what you just mentioned, copying and pasting and doing all these things. Um, Funny enough, like I've heard from someone that even if they have a good DLP solution that can somehow don't allow you to copy and paste in between email boxes, so they take photos using their mobile phones, and the AI is so good today to even parse the information
Yeah,
over there.
OCR, etc. I agree. Yeah. And
Yeah.
plus the variety of access and you have to control is quite complex, right? There's API calls to foundation model. I can use the web page of the foundation model. And it gets more tricky with SaaS embedded AI, right? So you use Salesforce, which
Hmm.
has, with Agentforce, um, generative and agentic AI under the hood. So my point is, many employees might not even know that they are using an AI-powered service
True.
online in the public.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I'm hearing these stories on daily basis almost, Alex. Now you mentioned the CISOs couple of times, and I'm sure like they are your personas and the people to go to bring this up because again, it's like part of the governance, it's part of the risk management and all this stuff. Did you start to see a change in the way because we always hear about security audits, we always hear about getting the compliance done for majority of the companies. Have you start to see AI being like one part of the long lists that CISOs they have to go with their team on to make sure that everything is safeguarded, best practices, or we didn't reach that yet, Alex?
Oh, it depends on the organization, right? So we
Hmm.
work with organizations who just started their AI journey, so they're still in the, um, you know, testing and learning mode, if you like. And equally, we work with organizations who have already, AI-powered solutions in production. I would say the biggest difference is the degree of collaboration with cross functions required. So unlike for other security disciplines in AI, I mentioned the safety security aspect earlier today, but it's also the group of stakeholders that are normally aligned or need to be aligned when you start deploying TRISM, trust, risk, and security management for AI. So normally we see close cooperation or collaboration between CISOs and application development teams, right? So when we get deployed, the application development teams will test us to make sure we don't add too much latency to the application,
Hmm.
as a simple example. You have other organizations where they already have a responsible AI body, right, that needs to be involved in use cases or agentic use cases that are being deployed. You might have CISOs, and I think I mentioned this, who basically tell business departments, hey, everybody can build agents as they like, but you have to drop this SDK in your code so I, as a CISO organization, can see what's
What's
happening.
happening?
Right. So long story short, I think it's the degree of cross-functional collaboration that kind of is different to other tech deployments or tech adaptations, because we see sometimes 4 or 5 different business functions being aligned in the adoption, safety, and security piece.
Right. Correct me if I'm wrong, Alex. So because you come on, all the layers that you just mentioned, which is basically um, observability, like understanding what's happening, and kind of also detecting these anomalies and make sure that everything is compliance. Now, usually when we put such systems, right, or when so we have this clash between like two sides. The side like they want to adopt AI at any cost. Don't stop us, guys. Like we need, we have a mandate from the like from the board, all the executives. We have to put AI.
Right.
While CISOs and other folks would say, guys, we understand, but we need to make sure. So, do you see this clash happening? In the enterprise today, and in reality, is there like kind of a compromise that sometimes you see the CISOs need to do in order to also make sure that the company is not left behind adopting AI?
Yes, although to your point, right? The CISO cannot and doesn't want to be the department of no. So yes, we do see that, and to my earlier example, we started a pilot with a large retailer a couple months back, and the CISO told us, you first have to go to the application development team, right? Once they
Hmm.
have greenlighted you, then we will look at it. So in this case, they were fully aware of, of constraints that they have based on the tech they want to deploy or implement. The other example that I mentioned is the agentic AI example. I can't tell you how many CISO conversations we have where the CISO tells us the CEO has declared, AI is the new thing. Everybody should use agents. And every business department is starting to play with agents. And the CISOs basically says, I have no idea which agents are running, what they're doing, which data they're accessing, which external sources they're accessing, and so on and so forth. So while there was this aggressive push towards AI adoption, we do see some degree of maturity kicking in sense of governance. To
Hmm.
my earlier point, right? CISOs issuing or responsible AI groups issuing governance that, again, repeating myself, says, hey, everybody can play with agents, but we have to be able to see them, right? Be able to observe them. So and lastly, we have seen many cases where bots were designed and they never saw the light of day, because ultimately the board stopped it or a governance body stopped it in an enterprise. um I don't think the CISOs really can say no. I think the topic is too hot and too much
Mm.
perceived as a competitive differentiator by senior executives. So in many cases, we do see the CISOs kind of chasing a bit behind the ball when it comes to AI safety and security.
Right. But the good thing which I'm noticing, Alex, in general, that people are aware of the balance that have to be put, in this, because also, the stories that are breaking out from um misconfigurations and everything you just mentioned about the problems and how you're solving it. So for example, like the other day there was a big uh, big news about something that happened, I think, with Anthropic, about the LLM injection kind of actors were using this for trying to extract data, and I think this is like raised the flag for even non-technical executives to understand that this is important. And I think, by the way, you mentioned something interesting, that the CISOs now push people to go talk to the application owners, like to make sure that these guys are okay, because again, speed is important. No one want to put another tool causing latency. alert fatigue, and all these things that always people talk about. Now, we kept talking about agents and agentic AI, Alex. Are we accelerating this more furthermore in 2026, you think, and beyond? Or, still people are like, hey, let's finish the LLMs, and let's finish also, what we were doing before, these LLM came out to public, and then start to think how we're gonna use agents. Like, in general, how you seeing
Right.
the adoption?
Well, you see a lot of news around the ROI is simply not there, and only 5% or
Yes.
6% of companies actually, produce cost savings or EBITDA improvements with AI. That will generally improve. Don't forget, agents are relatively dumb. They're nothing else but orchestrators, right? So they can't, most agents, unless they're very closely coupled to the large language model, are dumb orchestrators that need a large language model for all their instructions, right? For everything that they're doing. So we are basically, completely relying on the large language model capabilities and architecture. Now, we know that LLMs, the way they're built and trained today, have significant limitations, right? The notion was, hey, the more data I provide to a large language model during training, the better the model will get, right? But we know that this is A, not true, and B, we're reaching physical limitations to the capabilities of these models. So I do think you will see further adoption, in particular agentic AI. But you'll see a certain limit as to how complex the processes can be or should be, that we can basically move into an autonomous state. Because LLMs make mistakes. And if you have 3, 4 different models involved, and you have the issue of error downstream propagation, then there will be certain processes which you simply, from a risk perspective, will not move into the autonomous space yet. So I think, long story short, 26, you'll see a broader adaptation. You see more companies having the lessons learned to use agentic AI effectively. But I think there is limitations as to which kind of processes we actually can move into an autonomous state based on the quality, maturity, evolution of large language models.
I 100% agree with you, Alex. And I'm not an expert by any mean in this field specifically. I call myself a generalist, but interacting with different tools, and I have the chance sometimes to explore new things. Um, which you touched on, the hallucination of the LLMs, and again, agents are relying on the LLMs. So the other day, I've seen like people like jumping, hey, like this new thing came out, like you should try it. It's gonna like break the world. And I go and I just ask a simple thing, nothing hard, and it start to hallucinate from the first prompt. Oh, okay, what people are like doing this whole thing about. And again, back to the point. So for these agents to become 100% reliable, it's possible. We're not saying no, we're not denying, but yeah, I think there's some work in progress. And even all of the CEOs of the open AIs and Microsofts and Googles of the world, like they still say we still have work to do in enhancing what we have built so
Yeah,
far.
that's an understatement.
Yeah, of course, I can understand the marketing part.
Of
You're a
course.
founder yourself, Alex, so
Yeah.
I'm sure like I work in sales also as well, so I can understand all this. Now, talking about something a little bit non-technical on the business part. um you started a company in a complete new category, which if we ask someone or we tell someone 5 years ago about what you're doing, they say, what, like, what's that, like? But what was the hardest part, building the product in this category, both from technical perspective and business perspective?
On the technical perspective, it was the fact that we decided, to my earlier point, to only build models that are fully explainable. So we had to do data curation. That was just insane, right? So if you use a large language model, so many of our competitors just take your input and throw it into another language model and say, hey, this looks great, let's go. As we, wanted to use explainable models, we had to curate samples from scratch. So we by now have over 4 million samples that were curated, they're labeled, they're verified, and that was an extremely labor-intensive process. Yes, we
Hmm.
automated large parts of that over time, but that was one thing that I underestimated. I mean, it's a well known that you can have the best machine learning model. If the data is bad, it won't help you, or the model is only as good as your data. But I think that was one of the harder parts to automate and devise an effective mechanism to curate that much of data, across across a very broad field, from toxic language to illegal language to jailbreaks to prompt injections, you name it. um, I think that was hard, and we are still, to your other part of the question, it's still a challenge to us sometimes talking to CISOs, because the space, to your point, is very new, right? So
Hmm.
the concept that do detection and response not on network packets or code snippets or whatever, but on natural language, right? Where you have a benign state and a malicious state. That is still a new concept to many people, that you're now classifying and detecting language and making decisions on that basis for safety and security.
Yeah, and I think like many other technologies, like history showed us, like it gonna take a couple of, um, unfortunately, like bad things to
Yep.
happen before people they will have the wake up calls, and say, yeah, like we need a solution for this. But on the other side, the good news is like the acceleration of AI itself, Alex. I've seen like it also kind of accelerated even the slowest people that we could think about adopting new technologies, because AI, kind of one of the good things that happened, it forced people to go and say, hey, like we can't wait, we need to do something, like and yeah, of course, when you do things in hurry, bad things can happen. That's unfortunately, or fortunately, maybe it's good things to happen, right?
Yeah.
So because again, we need to learn from our mistakes. Now, the other thing I want to ask you about the the business, um of course you have customers now. So what were like the early signals that you kind of convinced you, although like you said it's hard to convince, but I mean, kind of now we have what we call a product market fit, like there is a validation
Mhm.
that what you are building has a possibility of becoming something that we can scale with time.
You mean, what are the indications that yes?
Yeah,
Um,
the early signals, I would call
Early
them.
signals. Well, the early adopters of AI, to a large degree, that we experienced, also had a relatively mature and advanced understanding of all the associated risks.
Hmm.
There was increasing media coverage, right, by AI going wrong, whether it's the Air Canada example, or I think it was it Chrysler, was his example of somebody buying a car online. So my point is, there was increasing media coverage of, of the downside or negative effects of AI. So that obviously helped. But the biggest push we have seen so far is really on the agentic AI side, because the problem there, it starts with a very simple premise: I don't have observability, right? So before we even go into safety and security and alignment classification, all that stuff, it's the simple problem is I can't secure what I can't see.
Right.
So yes, with the chatbots, the discussion was about, unwanted speech and utterances that are toxic and illegal. But in agentic, it's really that, hey, I don't need anything fancy to start with. I just want to have observability. I just want a single pane of glass where I can see which agents are flying around in the organization and what they are doing. You're not even at security or safety there, right? It's just the visibility, the observability. And that's relatively, low entry barrier and low hanging fruit, because you don't have to talk about the tech vectors and risk vectors and what possibly can go wrong. You really start with the basics: central, single pane of glass, agentic observability. And then you can start working with your peers, with the CISOs or the security SOC organization on particular risks, and you start dialing in those controls and those policies.
Right. Um, I don't like futuristic questions much. I'm not big fan, but the discussion brought us to this point, I believe. Do you think, Alex, we're gonna see at any time, I would not specify when, uh AI agents working alongside the security team in a sense, maybe a director of risk and compliance, which is basically an AI agent that reports to the CISO. I'm not asking an AI CISO because I know like this is still like very futuristic. But in the near future, can we expect to have AI agents that are part of the security team? Not in a sense that they just show us dashboards, that actually they can do some tasks
Oh,
like
it's happening
anyone who
already.
works.
It's
Yeah.
happening. So you brought up the alert fatigue, right? So one very common thing we see in the SOC space, in the SIEM space, in the SOAR security orchestration automated response space is vendors deploying agents to start sifting through logs, to start, just elevating incidents and issues that, that were done by triage by a human in the past. So it is early days, of course, but we already see a high
Mm.
degree of automation of legacy security functions. And I say legacy because I don't necessarily mean, securing Gen AI and agentic AI, relying and deploying agents to, basically automate the lower level tasks that were performed by humans. So if there's one summary of agentic AI, if you look across use cases, is low level, highly repetitive human driven tasks. Those are prime time for moving to agentic AI because they don't have too much variance. They have a high degree of repeatability. Um, and therefore they are good candidates for agentic AI. So you can apply that logic to HR, cybersecurity, engineering, finance, you name it. So long story short, it's happening already. The interesting debate in many enterprises is who is in charge ultimately of the agent, right? Is it IT? Is it HR? I mean, we have clients where HR technically owns the agents, right? Because it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of a digitized employee, if you like. Other
Right.
organizations say this is nonsense. It's ultimately, a program to a certain degree. Therefore, it should belong to IT. So I'm curious to see how that pans out over time in sense of how do we perceive an agent? Is it an employee or just software? And who ultimately manages these entities?
Time will reveal this for sure to us. And there is a debate now, as you said, not only for the cybersecurity, like maybe an AI CEO and AI board member and all this stuff. So of course, I think we're still in the early days, as you mentioned, Alex. But I agree with you about like things gonna accelerate. At least 26 and beyond. So people are like talking about 26, 27 as a transition phase,
Mhm.
and where we're gonna do a lot of trial and error until we can go to the next level of what's waiting for us. So we don't know. As we are coming close to end, Alex, final thing I always ask my guests, anything that you wanted to mention, maybe I didn't ask, and how people can get in touch and learn more.
So very simple. You can find us under aiceberg.ai. There's in particular a resource section where we publish all our papers and articles. We have our own podcast called "How Hard Can It Be?" So
Hmm.
you'll find the access to that podcast, and we talk about all things AI, right? So we have legal professionals there and talk about the implications of AI on the law or in context of law. We have board members there that talk about how AI is covered in the boardroom. So that's a good resource, I would say, to have a look at if you're interested and want to dive deeper into the topic.
Great. I'll make sure that all the links are available in the show notes. So if
Much
people are
appreciated.
listening to us on their favorite podcasting app, or if they are watching this on YouTube, they will find it on in the description. Alex, I can't thank you enough for this insightful discussion today, and eye-opening, I would say, for a lot of leaders, as well as developers and everyone who works with the LLMs and agents, because as you mentioned, at some point, every one of us, whether you are in tech or not, you will interact with agents. So it's good to understand, the attack surface, the risks, and at the same time, how we can understand, to your point, like we have the observability, the explainability, and of course the guardrails to secure these systems. So thank you very much for this discussion. And this is how usually I end my episodes. This is for the audience. If you just discovered us by luck, thank you for passing by. If you enjoyed, give me a favor, subscribe and share it with your friends and colleagues. And if you are one of the people who keeps coming again and again, thank you very much. 2025 was fantastic. Listenership went very high. We did it in the top 200 Apple podcast charts in multiple countries all the year. So keep changing countries. So thank you very much for everyone from wherever you listen to us or watch us. And as I say always, stay tuned for a new episode very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mehmet.
Hit that subscribe button, share the show with your tech-savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Your support means the world to us.